Yes, as Erica said, many changes were made to working conditions after a Factory Act was passed in 1833. The Factory Act improved the working conditions of children in factories. The changes that were made within the Act were mainly seen in age requirements and working hours. Children under the age of 9 years old were no longer required to work, and birth certificates of children had to be provided to employers. Before, children were working many long hours, no matter how old they were. But within the Factory Act of 1833, children did not have to work at night, and children who were 9 to 13 years old only had to work 9 hours a day, while children who were 13 to 18 years old worked 12 hours a day. Although these hours were still long, it was considered progress that was made for the lives of children during the Industrial Revolution. Children were also allowed to have 2 hours of schooling every day. In order for these conditions to be followed, inspectors were sent to factories. One man that looked to provide children with education was a cotton mill owner named Robert Owen. He also tried to make changes in his own factories, such as shortening working hours, and continued to pay his workers for 4 months when his factory had shut down.
Another act that was passed to improve working conditions was the Mine Act of 1842. Just like the Factory Act of 1833, the Mines Act enforced the practice that females and boys under the age of 10 did not have to work in underground coal mines.
Now let's go take a look at the Finchy family's response to the Industrial Revolution and the working conditions.
Straight to bed, Nadia. You must be so tired. Okay, Mommy. Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad.
Good night, Shannon.
I have to go do the washing.
No, you must be so exhausted.
I am. So are you, and so is Shannon.
I know. Honestly, I don't like her working in the factory. You have children crawling around in such small spaces and handling those dangerous machines. Not to mention what happened yesterday.
What do you mean?
You didn't hear? There was another attack on the factory, on the steam engine.
They're so violent.
I know. Maybe Shannon can get a job somewhere else, like sweeping a chimney.
Anywhere she works is going to be dangerous. I'd prefer if she didn't work at all.
You know we need the extra money. Come on, let's just go to bed.
I know, okay.
Now let's take a look at a real beneficiary of the Industrial Revolution.
Hello, my name is Colin. I'm a British middle-class entrepreneur, and I am proud to say that I am a classic example of a real beneficiary of the Industrial Revolution. I am the son of a shopkeeper. Many of my peers are also the sons of shopkeepers, craftsmen, or farmers who had little money to start with. Most of my capital comes from manufacturing. I am now the owner of a factory. It is people like me who are the basis of the middle class. Others are in charge of railway, steel production, or banks. Rising incomes had allowed me to build my own business and keep my wife at home. A moral code has been developed that separates us from the working class.
Good evening, everyone. Let's welcome our first guest, David Ricardo. Tell us a little bit about yourself, David.
Well, I made a fortune in stocks at a young age. I then became an economist and published the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation.
I understand you have some interesting opinions pertaining to the economy and the current ongoings of the Industrial Revolution. What are they?
I believe that when wages are higher, capital-intensive production is favored over labor-intensive production. In other words, since businesses have to pay more for their workers, they're going to concentrate more on investing in new factories and materials. Additionally, if each nation produces the goods that they can make most efficiently, all nations will benefit in the end. Every country has specific resources and technology that are best for certain exports. Nations shouldn't try to produce everything they need. This is called the theory of comparative advantage. I am a strong supporter of free trade, and I am against the Corn Laws.
Thank you for those insightful words, David. Let's welcome our next guest, Thomas Malthus. How are you today, Thomas?
Oh, excellent, considering that the human population will soon run out of a food supply.
Care to elaborate on that, Mr. Malthus? What are your opinions on population and the economy today?
Yes, my ideas were put forth in my famous work, An Essay on Principle of Population. Basically, population is always going to increase and will keep increasing at an exponential rate. In contrast, food supply will only increase to a certain point due to lack of resources and land. Due to this concept, it is only a matter of time before humans will starve and hunger will persist. However, it is possible that a natural disaster or other means of population control will reduce the population periodically so that the food supply will be comparatively more plentiful at times.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
Although it is true that the Industrial Revolution brought about many advances to society, with a few people becoming quite prosperous and wealthy, it remains that it also brought about many ugly consequences to life. With the Industrial Revolution came a rapid growth of population. Many people migrated from the countryside into the industrial cities or poor neighborhoods.
This rapid growth in population led to dangerous and unsanitary conditions, such as overcrowding and air pollution, which had been present but began to steadily grow worse. The tenements in which working class and poor families lived in were cheap, very poorly built, and often had several families living in and sharing one room. There was no indoor sewage system. As a result, trash and excrements would be thrown out the windows. People would then drink water from wells and rivers that had been contaminated by the sewage on the streets.
Overall, conditions for the poor and working class were not good. Women had been working before the Industrial Revolution, doing basic household chores, and that generally remained the same at the beginning of the revolution. The only difference was that hand power had been replaced with machinery. Women living in the cities without children had 7 main ways to earn money: street selling, manual labor, agricultural work, mine work, factory work, domestic service, and prostitution.
When other jobs would fail, many young women would resort to becoming domestic servants. These jobs required long hours, so the wages were very low, and came with the risk of sexual abuse by male employers. It was common for a servant to be fired if they were sick or pregnant. By the start of the 20th century, about 91.5% of English servants and 82.9% of French servants were women, in contrast to how, prior to the Industrial Revolution, male domestic servants were about equal in number to women.
Women with young children often tried to find work that could be done in their homes, such as sewing, laundry, or taking in lodgers, which paid considerably less than the jobs available for women without children. Eventually, more would start working in factories. Married women would take factory jobs when their husbands were unable to support the family, most likely due to an industrial accident, and unmarried women would work to support themselves or to save up for marriage.
Those with infants had to make the tough decision whether to leave their babies in the care of another or bring them to the factory and keep them dry. A public school system had not yet been created, and there were no daycare centers, so parents usually made their kids work in the factories as well, especially since poor families could barely make ends meet with just their parents working.
Employers favored children as they were cheaper and could perform different tasks better than adults. They would often hire orphans, seeing as they were willing to work for an even cheaper pay and no one would be looking after them. It was not surprising to find children younger than 6 working in factories or mines.
Women in both the upper middle class and the working class had a unique perspective of themselves in the Industrial Revolution. During the pre-Industrial Revolution era, women in the higher and working classes of society used to be confined to the home since their daily tasks included household chores such as cooking and raising the children. However, during the Industrial Revolution, women of all classes began to leave the home in order to work in mines, factories, or in dressmaking shops. Females in the upper and lower classes began to feel more important since they were able to earn money for themselves and their families through these jobs. They saw that they were valuable to their households since they now had a significant income. The women also felt less dependent on men, so their self-esteem was greatly improved. Women even had independent lifestyles outside of the home. All of these factors caused women to realize that they were equal to men, which eventually led to the women's rights movement.
Although women of all classes began to work during the Industrial Revolution, their reasons and incentives for working were different. For instance, women of the working class began to work to feed their family.
The extra money earned from their jobs would be useful in buying clothes, food, or other living expenses. On the other hand, women of the upper class would work during their leisure time. Often, women of the upper class would simply spin thread or make dresses, jobs that were much easier than working in a factory or in the mines. Women in the working class had to work in the factories for long hours because they were desperately in need of the money. Wealthy women worked as seamstresses to socialize and to pass the time.
The wealthy and the working class women were also similar because they both experienced business cycles. Sometimes there was economic hardships and other times the business was very profitable. The upper middle and lower class women realized that it was important to save some money from the prosperous times to help when the hard times would come around. People who did not put aside any money found it extremely hard to survive during the scarce times of food production such as the potato famine. This idea of a boom and bust economy affected women in the working class because they eventually learned to prepare for future economic difficulties. The wealthy women were also impacted by the business cycle because they experienced the cotton spinning boom in the 1790s. Of course, this was shortly followed by a bust since inventors developed power looms. Therefore, the women in the higher class had lower wages since their cotton spinning skills was not in demand anymore.
Before the Industrial Revolution, women for the working class would work within the family, doing household chores. Once the Industrial Revolution began, they began appearing more in public for work. It appears to be almost the opposite for women from the upper and middle class. It was not uncommon to find a woman married to a merchant who was in charge of a small business, managing it by themselves. With the Industrial Revolution came the cult of domesticity, thus removing middle-class women from the business world. Instead, they were in charge of the home, educating of children, the family's social life, and servants. Many women felt cheated, and the change was unjust, and thus they did not accept it. Turn up team. Mr. Leston, this one's for you. Need a way to make things quicker? Well, I got a solution. And its name is the Great Industrial Revolution, caused by agriculture, trade, and a growing population. You know that this event would affect many nations, beginning in Britain in the 18th century. It drained factory workers, both physically and mentally, while owners sat back and kept rolling in the profits. And all them Luddites came in trying so hard to stop it. New inventions and discoveries that benefit us all, from important dudes like Franklin, Eli, Whitney, and John Hall. Some changes are pollution, transportation, overcrowded cities. Railroads were major too, you know they changed society. Iron textiles and steam engine, all these were key. And communication changed with the use of telegraphy. We got a bunch of new thinkers, you know, like Marcus and Ricardo. Here's our wages, labor, food, and economy, yup. They got utilitarians like Bentham and Mill. The greatest good for all the people should be fulfilled. And last we got Karl Marx, you know he can't be missed, cause he provided foundation for all future communists. And all this information, it may seem like a lot, but really, to be honest, it just can't be forgot. Cause if the revolution did not happen in this way, you know for sure that the world will not be the same place today. Facts.